We're dying wrong. Dying is one of the most natural things about living, and we're doing it wrong. We let barriers get in the way of our communication with our dying loved ones. Barriers that can prevent us from having the type of communication that will make our relationship stronger, engage us with that dying loved one, bring comfort to each other, and alleviate the distress that comes with that time of life. We need to find a way of how to die right. But these barriers get in the way. Barriers like fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of not saying what we want to say, fear of diminishing hope or making things worse. And we avoid awkward conversations. We stay clear of talking about taboo topics like illness, death, and dying. And we're unaware of the needs that the dying feel, the needs that the dying need. Maintaining control, independence, and dignity. But we can get over these obstacles. We can knock down these barriers because improving our communication creates a good dying experience. So how do we get there? Where do we start? Well, the first thing we do is we address those fears. Why are we afraid of saying the wrong thing? I believe we place this expectation on ourselves that is just unrealistic. We tell ourselves we have to say what's perfect. We look for the perfect words, and the perfect words don't exist. So rather than wasting our time seeking something that doesn't exist, we should examine the message that we want to give and then ask ourselves if it's appropriate. How do we know if our message is appropriate? We look at the context, we ask ourselves, is this the right place? Is this the right time? How well will the person we want to speak to receive the message? When my grandmother was dying, it was okay for me to talk about end-of-life planning. When my mother was dying, it was not. I had to look at the person I was speaking to and the context of the situation. Next, we need to start talking about dying. We need to discuss death. We don't do it because it reminds us that we're mortal. It reminds us that we're only here for a short period of time. And it reminds us that one day we and our loved ones are going to depart. And that's scary to us. We even try to convince ourselves that if we don't talk about it, it won't arrive. And we know that that's not true. So, if we're still dying, even though we're not talking about it, why don't we ask ourselves, why aren't we talking about it? Why are we going through this alone? Why aren't we speaking with our dying loved ones about our raw feelings? Why aren't we telling them, I'm scared too. I'm angry. This isn't good. Why don't we go through that together rather than walking alone? We can bring comfort to each other through doing that. And lastly, we need to start embracing the needs of the dying, because embracing the needs of the dying creates a good dying experience. When my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, months down the road, she was entering hospice. And we gathered at the house, and the hospice nurse came to visit, and it was myself and some family members. And as the nurse asked my mother some questions, every time the nurse asked a question, one of my sister-in-laws volunteered the answer. And although I know my sister-in-law's heart was in a really good place, she loved my mother, she wanted to demonstrate that. She wanted to help. But as the opportunities were missed with my mother being able to respond for herself, I also noticed that there was a change in her demeanor. And frustration came upon her face, and finally she stood up and she left the room. A few minutes later, she returned, and she looked at everyone in the room. And my mom said, I'm still here. I'm still here. This is my life. I can answer my own questions. Her words were strong. Her voice was weak, but the message was loud and clear. And everyone in that room knew at that moment that my mother needed to have that control. See, the dying are not the dead. They're still with us. And when you have a terminal illness, one of the things that you don't have much of is control. And it's our jobs to use empathy and to pay attention to that and support our loved ones as much as we can so that they can maintain that control and that dignity, even through something as simple a task as answering their own questions. Years after my mother passed away, my siblings and I were cleaning out the house, and my other sister-in-law came across a handwritten journal that my mother had started when she first was diagnosed. And she gave it to me, and there was one entry in there that still stands out in my mind, and that was, there's nothing harder than talking to my kids about this. The this was dying. And I wonder if my mother knew that for me and for my siblings, that the only thing harder than talking about my mom dying was not talking about her dying. I wonder if that would have made a difference in her dying experience and ours. I believe it did, or I believe it would. I also know that it affected how we grieve differently. Some of us will not have the opportunity to have these conversations with our loved ones. We won't, because some of our loved ones will be taken unexpectedly. So when you do have the opportunity, when those moments are there, use them. Communicate authentically, appropriately. Don't leave any unfinished business. Tell them what's on your heart. Go through the walk together. Alleviate that distress. And when the time comes, release them, because that is how you die right. Thank you.